And good morning again. We welcome to the Face the Nation studios for the first time the newly elected senator from Kentucky, Rand Paul. Mr. Paul, thank you very much for coming. Congratulations. Polls show overwhelmingly that voters want the two sides to find compromise. Do you come to Washington to compromise?
Well, I think there is room for compromise. I think that overwhelmingly the polls also show that people are concerned about the debt. And you have, reasonable people saying that one of the biggest threats to our national security is the debt. So I say the compromise is often you've had Republicans who say, oh, we'll cut domestic spending, but we won't touch the military. And then you have some good people on the left who say, well, the debt is a problem. I mean, Steny Hoyer has also said, you know what, the national debt is a threat to our security. So there are good people on the left who are saying this. But their compromise has to be they have to cut domestic spending. So really, if you're serious about the budget, you have to look at the entire budget, military and domestic, if you want to make a dent in the debt.
Are you willing to cut both sides, including military?
Absolutely. And you have to look at it. There's no way else. It's all consuming between entitlements and then the domestic spending and then the national defense. If you don't look at all of it, you don't get anywhere close. And this is an exploding problem, getting worse as we speak.
David Axelrod, one of the president's senior advisors, says that the president has called nearly every newly elected Republican in the Congress and all of the newly elected senators. What did he say to you?
He hasn't gotten through to me yet, but I'd love to speak with the president.
He didn't
No,
call
we have. Well, we haven't gotten. I haven't heard that I've gotten a phone call, but I think I would hear about that if the president calls. But I would love to speak with the president and show him that people coming from the Tea Party can work with people from the other side of the aisle. But really, we have to be serious about what we do about the debt.
What would you say to him? What would be the first thing you'd say?
I laughingly said the other day, my kids would like to meet his kids. So I think getting to know people personally is a good step forward in having dialogue up here. And then from that, I would say that I do like the fact that they appointed the Debt Commission. I think we're showing people who have serious ideas about trying to address the debt. And I want to be one of those who is part of the debate about how do we fix our country? How do we get out of this mess?
Well, let's just talk about that, because the Deficit Commission issued kind of a preliminary report. It's not even their final report, and it seems to gore everyone's eyes. It calls for cuts in spending, coupled with some tax hikes, including a 15-cent increase in the gasoline tax. So let me just run through part of this and see how you feel about it. Would you support raising the gasoline tax?
I don't think I want to raise taxes right now. I think government's too big, and so I think we need to cut spending. The way I see it is that you want the private sector to have more money. I want to expand the private sector because we have a serious recession. So I want to leave more money in the private sector. I want to shrink the ineffective sector of the economy, which is the government.
Well, the commission doesn't seem to think you can do it with just cuts. But let's run through a couple other things here. Eliminate mortgage interest deductions. Would you favor that?
No, once again, I'm on the other side. I want to be on the side of reducing spending. So I think really the compromise is where you find the reductions in spending, but I don't think the compromise is in raising taxes. I mean, here you have to put things in perspective. We now consume at the federal level 25% of the gross domestic product. Historically, we were at the 20%. So we've taken 5% away from the private sector, and the private sector is the engine that creates all these jobs. I want to send that 5% back to the private sector.
Well, the commission is talking about bringing it back to 21%. But let's go through a couple other specifics. Increase the retirement age for Social Security?
Yeah, and I think you have to probably do it quicker, actually. I think you can't do it on people who have already made their decisions or on people who can't afford it. But I would say instead of waiting till 2050, you've got to move that up many decades to have a chance. And the other thing is, instead of taxing high wage earners more on their Social Security, give maybe have means testing for those who are high wage earners for receiving the Social Security or for receiving Medicare instead of adding new taxes. The problem and the reason why that's better is instead of the government sending a check to somebody who makes $200,000 a year in retirement income, let's not tax them. Let's not send the money to them. You don't want to tax them, though, because they are creating jobs. You don't want to take more money out of the private sector.
Cut the federal workforce by 10%?
Absolutely.
Do you think that's doable?
Well, the federal employees unions are pretty strong, but you have to do it. I mean, at the very least, freeze the hiring and then through attrition shrink it. But really, I think you should shrink the federal workforce and you should make their pay more comparable. Right now, the total compensation for government workers versus private workers is almost 2 to 1.
Would you include the military in that?
Well, maybe there are parts in the military that could, but I think the soldiers should not have reduced pay. I mean, you look at what the average soldier makes, it's not a lot of money, and they're asked to put their life on the line. So I don't see reducing the pay of soldiers, but there is within the military structure, maybe contractors and different people at different levels that could be eliminated.
What about military health care? It's totally out of control, the spending on that right now. Do you think they ought to think about reducing benefits that military retirees get?
Right. I think we have to look at how it is all distributed, but the bottom line is there are a couple things I think the federal government should do, and I'm always for reining in and getting rid of spending, but we should take care of our national defense and we should take care of our veterans. So those are two priorities, and I'm not for reducing pay or reducing veterans benefits, but does everything have to be done within a reasonable structure where it's not outlandish? We do have to look at the process of all of it.
You're not going to be voting in this special session when they take up extending the Bush tax cuts, but I'd just like to, unless they are unable to do anything and it carries over to next year in the new Congress, but I'd like to get your thinking on that. There are various kind of little signals coming out of the White House that the president might be willing to compromise, and what everybody seems to be talking about, temporarily extending the cuts for the upper income people, and in return for that he would go along with it, and he wants to extend the tax cuts to the middle and lower income people. Would you entertain something like that? Do you think that's a good idea?
I think the best thing is to make the tax cuts permanent. And the reason is people are talking as if this is something new. Businesses have predicated and made their business plans based on these tax cuts now for 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And so if you abruptly change that, you're changing the business model of someone who's made decisions based on that.
But could you see a temporary extension of those upper income
If that's all we can get, that's better than nothing. But I think the more permanent, the better. And then what we need to do as Republicans, if we're serious about the debt, is keep the tax cuts permanent, but then come in and say, here's several $100 billion we'll save by having spending reduction bills immediately introduced in Congress. And I think you'll find some of us that will be doing that from the get-go.
I just want to ask you this question. What do you envision the federal government is, and what do you expect it to do? Because, for example, after the BP spill, I remember reading that you came down pretty hard on the administration for being too tough and putting too much pressure on BP. At one point, you said it was just downright un-American. Well, on reflection, are you glad you said that?
Well, the interesting thing is I think it got sort of distorted because it wasn't that they were being harsh that I was disagreeing with. I didn't like the language. I didn't think the president or his people should say something like putting the boot heel on the throat of a business. I didn't like that. It wasn't that I thought that we shouldn't be tough. I do think we should be tough, and if they broke the law, they should be punished, et cetera, et cetera. They should be responsible. They should pay for the cleanup. But I don't think an American president should be talking about putting the boot heel on the throat of a corporation, because it sends the wrong signal that the government's the enemy somehow of business. And we need to always recognize that 1 in 10 businesses succeed. We need to do everything we can to encourage business, because that's where the jobs are created.
Well, another statement that you made that kind of caught my eye was after one of the mine accidents down in Kentucky, and I think a couple of people were killed, and you said we're back into this idea, and I'm paraphrasing here, of trying to find somebody to put the blame on and not recognizing that sometimes accidents just happen.
Well, that was a poor choice of words, and I think my wife even told me that was a poor choice of words. You need to think what you're saying. But what I was trying to point out is that as a physician, you know, if you come to me and I do your eye surgery, I'll tell you there's 1 in 1,000 chances that you could get an infection in your eye and you could lose the vision. And when that happens, I might have done everything perfectly, but it's one of these risks. And to say accidents happen won't comfort you, because that's just a bad wording. So I used the wrong words. But I do honestly want to tell you, if you're my patient, that there are risks. And I think we realize that of all the things that happen, that there are risks of oil spills, there are risks of mine collapses. And it isn't always that someone intentionally did it, or even that someone broke a regulation. Sometimes there are natural acts of tragedy that happen. That's what I was trying to point out, and I guess maybe I'll learn to choose better words.
All right. Well, Rand Paul, thank you. Welcome to Washington. We hope you'll come back to see us.